Hello, good day to everyone. Welcome to the third edition of the workshop for Open Citations and Open Scholarly Metadata. We have an exciting program for today with the great speakers that will present kind of very different perspectives on the Open Scholarly domain in general. But before starting, just a few recommendations. First of all, we are kindly asked to all the people and speakers that are connected via Zoom, which is the application that we are using for ending the workshop, to switch off the camera and the mic when they are not talking, basically. Each talk that will be introduced during the workshop, it is 15 minutes and will be followed by 5 minutes of question answering. And then for people connected in Zoom, if you have any question for the talks, please write them down in the chat of Zoom. Instead, for all the people, general audience that is following this workshop live in YouTube, please use the live chat in YouTube for doing questions. So the workshop is organized in a series of speech, but first, let me just summarize very briefly all the video that are available in the web page of the workshop that we have received as formal submission to the workshop. So we received several videos and we have accepted 10 of them that are all listed in the program of the workshop. You can see it when you want. They are available on the web, so you can just watch them after the workshop without any problem. But I would like to summarize very briefly all of them in order to allow you to understand what is the coverage of all these videos. So the first video is by Zaid from Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Information Technology. In the video, he defines what a scholarly digital object is, which he defines as a composed object consisting of an article describing research, and that is accompanied by additional items such as the list of authors, other kind of metadata like the venue, the publisher of the article, the data sets and code introduced or used in the article itself with their metadata, research results, etc. Then in the video, Zaid quickly introduces the main issues concerning the verification of a scholarly digital object and concludes the speech by advertising the first conference of Fair Digital Object that will be in Leiden at the end of October 2022. In another video, Fabian from the University of Bamberg presents his tool for helping people in peer reviewing. Indeed, any research builds on previous work, and one of the peer reviewers' activities is to identify if some relevant works has been missed from a paper. Peer Suggest is one of the tools for helping reviewers with this activity. Starting from a selection of seed works, for instance, those ones that are cited in the reference list of the given article, the tool returns other relevant works that are related to them. In the video, Fabian shows a tutorial on how to use Pure with a real example. In another video, David from the Knowledge Media Institute, Open University, introduces his experience studying academic tenure practices. Often research assessment exercises are based on metrics built upon citations that are all treated equally. However, citation may have different function within a paper. For instance, because the citing paper reuses a method introduced in the cited work, or either agrees or disagrees with the conclusion of the cited work, etc. According to the current literature, automatic annotation done via machine learning tools or manual annotation done by the authors have been the main ways to assign such a citation function formally to citations. Through Essential, David warns that such reasons for citing should not become a way to create new metrics, but rather to understand better how a piece of work has been cited. In another video, Mohammad from Gezis introduced a project outside which aims to develop a tool for detecting the bibliographic references in publications and matching them to existing databases. The workflow implemented in their system uses different tools for addressing each part of the process, from identifying which part of the input article in PDF is a bibliographic reference to the extraction of reference metadata. Finally, he shows a demo of the tool using a PDF of a scholarly article available online. Eric, in another video from Iowa State University, shows some early results analyzing the availability of reference data in OpenAlex. He created a Jupyter notebook that describes the work and makes it entirely reproducible. He highlights some statistics about the number of references included in the analyzed paper and shows, among other things, that there are some papers that do not have references in OpenAlex, but actually that they have references defined in the source article. The Jupyter notebook also includes useful graphs to look at the entire data set, as well as a single DOI in time. Another video by George from the University of Strathclyde introduced RIOX, the Research Output Metadata Schema, a tool that was originally devised as an OAI PMH metadata application profile that many repositories in the United Kingdom have supported. Currently, the schema is maintained by the UK Confederation of Open Research and Repositories and has a governance group that works to improve it. Version 3 release candidate has recently been made available and reuses existing vocabulary such as Dublin Current Schema.org. It allows the identification of publication types and other relations with different expression of the same work, such as preprint, PDF, and XML version of the work, and also other research-related objects such as dataset, code, projects, and grants. In her video, Domenica from Crossref talks about the importance of metadata matching, that is, matching strings referring to something, such as an affiliation or a paper, to an existing entity that can be identified by a persistent identifier or PID. For instance, at Crossref, 70% of bibliographic references included in article metadata sent by the publisher do not contain the DOI of the cited work. They were able to retrieve it automatically for only 41% of these references. And then she ends the speech by answering some relevant question. Do we need less and less matching in time in the future? Is title lookup enough for matching citations? Can we be sure that all citation links in the data are correct? Concluding, the metadata matching is not perfect, but it is very much needed indeed. Dietrich from ZB Med Information Center for Life Science introduced NFDI, a German initiative to build a national research data infrastructure. Among the chapters of this initiative, one is entirely dedicated to NDFI for data science, which focus on supporting all steps of the complex and interdisciplinary research data life cycles, including collecting, creating, processing, analyzing, publishing, archiving, and reusing resources in data science and artificial intelligence. The speech is structured by answering 4 questions that introduce NDFI for data science, fair digital objects, and reproducibility. Kim from the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Information Technologies starts her speech by highlighting how inefficient it is to transfer the entire scholarly data from one container to another, and even how it is difficult to exchange only the right and relevant amount of data instead all of them. Then she moves to push for need for a distributed infrastructure for data exchange, and briefly discusses how the F of the FAIR principles, that is findability, can be implemented within such an architecture. She concludes with a question: does a distributed architecture also need a distributed PID system? And last but not least, Bianca from Sesam Open Science showed that funders metadata in Crossref are available for only 25% of articles, but it is difficult to explain and to assess if an article should be supposed to have such funds expressed as information or not. And in order to analyze this, she ran a study with 5,000 NWO-funded articles available in Crossref and discovered that only 65% have funding information in Crossref. This image differs publisher by publisher. Of course, some publishers are behaving better. They publish more information than others. And also she noticed that other bibliographic databases contain more funding information than Crossref, probably because they extract it from the acknowledgement section of the article. So these are a very brief summary of all the videos that we have published on the website. And now we can start straight with the very first speaker of today, that is Alberto Martin, who is going to introduce his article. Hi, Alberto. Thank you for being here, first of all.
Hello. Thank you, Silvio.
So I leave the stage to you. So please share your slides and you can start when you are,
yes.
You are fine.
Sharing. Okay. Can you see the slides now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for attending this workshop, and thank you, Silvio, David, Ludo, everyone from the organization, for the opportunity to participate in this event. Today, I want to speak a little about what I think is an absolutely central concept in scholarly communication, which is the scholarly record. Because my impression is that not enough attention is being given to this topic, which is something I find strange, considering that many other concepts that are related, such as open access, open scholarly metadata, open data, are very popular right now, and some of them have been popular for a couple of decades. So the goal of this talk is to try to dive a little bit into this concept. Well, actually, I became interested in the concept of a scholarly record more or less a year ago. And this interest was actually sparked by another invitation by David and Silvio. So I think it's very appropriate that I'm making this presentation here, because they had a hand in setting me on this path. So they invited me to update a prior analysis of the citation coverage of several data sources, in which I included COCI. Well, I call it COCI. I don't know if it's the right way to say it. But, because at that point, most of the large publishers had decided to make their references open, and this had changed a lot in the coverage of this data source. So I took this invitation as an opportunity not only to update the data, which you can see the main results here, but also as an opportunity to try to articulate a rationale around the need for open scholarly metadata. And this is when I noticed the concept of scholarly record, because this was a term that was occasionally thrown around, but usually in a vague way. And it wasn't very clear what people meant when they used this term. So I started to think more closely about this term. Because my impression is that most of these, well, all of these data sources are not what we could call a scholarly record. And they are mostly what I would call word mirrors, because each of them overrepresents some areas and underrepresents others, and some have limitations in the quality of the metadata. So the picture is not sharp enough, or some are closed, some are open. So we cannot say that these data sources are a definitive and complete record of the scholarly communication activities. So thinking about this term, something that I noticed is that we seem to use the concept of publication and the concept of record somewhat interchangeably. And I think this is not correct. So I've designed this little example to identify the similarities and differences between publications and records. So to the left, you can see the cover of a book of poems by Federico García Lorca. He was a famous poet and playwright from my home city, Granada. And to the left, sorry, to the right, we have Federico García Lorca academic record at the University of Granada, which is where he studied. Both of these are documents, both are information assets. So what's the difference between them? I'll give you a hint. So the main difference that I find here is that the book of poems is distributed by a commercial publisher. So in this way, it's a commoditized information asset. So if you can't afford the price to obtain a copy, you have to be lucky to have a library closed where you can access this document. However, the academic record is completely different. This document goes through a completely different process. First, it's important to say that this document is created for a specific reason. And this reason is to support the activity of the organization where it was created. And this is very important because other documents, which are not records, are not created for this purpose. Records are distinct in this aspect. So Federico García Lorca enrolls at the University of Granada, and as a result, the University of Granada creates a record to keep track of the activities of this person and eventually to decide whether he deserves to graduate. So this document is evidence that some activities have taken place. And this document is also important to say that it is preserved at the University of Granada in its archive, because the University of Granada sees it as its responsibility to manage this record. Okay, so the main difference between a publication and an archive, and the main difference between a library and an archive is that while a library can select documents that are going into its collection after considering the needs of its users, an archive does not make this selection because it deals with documents that are generated as a natural result of the activity of the organization and in the interest of supporting these same activities in the future. I must say that there is not a lot of cross-pollination between the library community and the archives community. I think this is kind of a problem, but maybe you see now one of the main differences between publication and record. Okay, so if the left one is a publication and the right one is a record, so what is this? Well, we could say that publications have behaved for a long time. Academic publications have behaved like the example in the left. We have had access to them if we are able to afford them. But we can also say that publications are actually the result of or a way to evidence the research activities that researchers do in their daily work. So which of them is it? Are academic publications actually publications, or are they records, or are they something in between? And I think many of the issues surrounding the scholarly record are a consequence of mixing these two concepts. Okay. So let's speak about the scholarly record. I became interested in this topic and I tried to find research about this topic. And what I found is that there's barely any research done about the scholarly record, which in contrast, there's a lot of research about open access or about scholarly publishing in general. So in the Web of Science, last month, I found only 25 documents about the scholarly record or the version of record, which is a related concept as well. But I'm happy to say that in other databases, in Google Scholar, I found that actually this is a topic that is beginning to gain traction. And as you can see here, as recently as 13 days ago, 17 days ago, 70 days ago, there were documents that tried to analyze this topic in some way or another. Okay, so my question was, does the scholarly record behave like an actual record? Or is this term used more like a figure of speech, like something that doesn't actually have a substance? And this is where my education in library and information science kicked in. And I remembered that there is a whole field of expertise dedicated to the task of records management. And because luckily our profession is not the only one that has to deal with records. We think maybe that we are very special because we publish publications, but actually all professions have to deal with this problem. So, record management is a field that has developed to solve this problem in many different kinds of professions. Currently, the main standard that specifies the concept as principles of this area is the ISO 15489. And I thought that it would be interesting to try to find similarities between these principles and what's actually happening in scholarly communication. So I selected some excerpts and tried to compare these declarations to what's actually happening. The first declaration is this one. The creation, capture, and management of records are integral parts of conducting business in any context. And this means that the first rule of records management is that each organization is responsible for managing its own records. And in the academic context, this is not happening. Many publication venues are not owned or governed by the institutions and communities that contribute to the record. Instead, they are governed by other organizations that provide necessary services, but do not necessarily share the same values and goals. And this can easily lead to tensions. And we actually have some examples here. Well, the first example, you probably know about it, is a research community in quantitative science studies decided to abandon a journal owned by a commercial publisher because they didn't agree on how to run the journal, what options to offer, how to govern the journal in general. So they created a new journal, and there's also a lot of development around the creation of diamond open access journals that are led by the scholarly community. And there are also declarations in favor of this view. Okay. Another excerpt is this one. Records are both evidence of business activity and information assets, and records are distinguished by their reliance on metadata, which is the topic of this workshop. So I think that here we have several examples. I think that content without metadata has limited use. This is it's something that we all understand. It's like a cookbook without an index would be of limited use. And we have very early on, we have understood that citations are important because they are evidence of how new research is influenced by past research. So from 10 years ago, the popular plea by David Shelton to Open Citations, which recently has had a major victory. I think that Ludo and Claudio will speak about this later, so I will not dwell on this. But to me, this is a sign that we are beginning to have a clearer understanding of the needs that the challenges that we need to solve in this digital age. Another excerpt is this one about the usability. Well, actually there are two. A usable record is one that can be located, retrieved, presented, and interpreted within a time period deemed reasonable. But this is what the standard says, but what do we actually have? We have limited access to documents still, and this is something that goes completely against the principle. The second excerpt says that metadata for records should support usability, and it should use identifiers, and this is probably very resonates with you a lot. We use identifiers, and the use of identifiers is considered very important in academic metadata. And recently, there has been declarations in favor of improving the metadata of research objects such as data. And also, I would like to say that the FAIR principles. No, sorry, I had an interruption. Yes, the FAIR principles are actually, as I see it, a rediscovery in this case of records management principles. The next excerpt is about processes before outputs. And this one says that records document individual events or transactions, or may form aggregations that have been designed to document work processes, activities, or functions. And traditionally, we have always worked with just one version of the document, the publisher branded version. But more recently, we have realized that there are many versions of the documents, and more recently, we have realized that, in fact, there are many kinds of outputs that are related to the same project and that we should take into account, such as code, data, protocols, reviews, and editorial decisions that are now, there are declarations that they should be open as well. Updates, corrections, retractions, or other kinds of outputs related to the main report, like non-expert versions, video, or tweets. And lastly, I wanted to talk about something that the standard says about metadata. Metadata is said to be an essential component of any record, and metadata should display the relationship among records and record system, and about the agents who create, manage, and use records. And it also talks about point of capture metadata and process metadata. And we have examples of this. The research nexus vision by the Crossref resonates a lot. I think it's very similar to what the standard says here. Open Citations and OpenAlex are trying to identify these relationships between records. OpenAlex talks about the scientific knowledge graph. So it's all the same to me. And about process metadata, I wanted to highlight the issue of usage data, because usage data is a topic that is not being discussed a lot, and is leading to issues such as surveillance publishing. There is an article here very interesting about this topic. Okay, so my question is that scholarly publishing seems to be stretching a lot, and perhaps it's time to understand it from another perspective. Publishing has been very useful throughout history because it has allowed reasonably global scholarly conversation when global conversations were very difficult. And the illusion of a scholarly record was maintained by libraries acquiring similar collections. But now we can create an actual scholarly record, and we can do that using the principles of records management. So to the combination of these two concepts, I would call it scholarly records management. And my suggestion is that we take advantage of these principles as a tool to design what the future of scholarly communication should look like. And I propose this term, although I know that other terms such as gold, diamond, fair are much more flowery. This maybe is more dull, but I think it represents better what it tries to do. This is a definition which I will not read, but the important thing is to say that scholarly records management should span the whole process from creation, contextualization, and dissemination, registration, certification, curation, preservation, and reuse and retrieval of the scholarly record. Lastly, these are some of the summary of what I think we should focus in if we adopt this perspective of scholarly records management. And the most important part is that scholarly institutions should take collective responsibility for the scholarly record, which is not happening right now. And that we should focus on processes more than outputs. We should strive to create a scholarly archive instead of a market of publications. We should discuss public records instead of publications. And we should think in terms of a record of versions instead of a version of record. Yes, well, these are the barriers, but I think I'm out of time. So I'll leave it at this. Thank you. And if you have any questions.
Thank you, Alberto, for your presentation. You can just, if you can unshare the screen in order to see you again. Thank you. I have actually a curiosity right now. I don't know if we have some technical problems, because maybe we cannot see you on YouTube, but let's try to check it indeed.
Okay.
I don't know why. Something, because of course we have tested everything, and then the problem happens exactly during the. But let me try if I can change.
Try to disable and.
No. I'm just trying to make you a co-host to see if something will change, but just for the moment. But I have a question in the meantime. I was curious about what you say, that the work that you have presented today was basically derived from a previous interaction that you had with David and I was just curious about what was the light that actually allowed you to start with this.
Well, the idea was that I wanted to find a rationale to explain why scholarly open scholarly metadata is necessary, because we can say yes, it would be very useful for us bibliometricians because we could work with data more easily, but this is not I think this should not only be the only reason. So I tried to find a more general reason, and that's when I found the concept of a scholarly record. And then I remembered about these principles of records management. I tried to combine them all, and I found that there are many similarities between them. And actually, now I have converted myself. I think I've gone through the looking glass. And I think of everything in terms of records instead of publications, but I don't know what you will think.
Okay, thank you, Alberto, for it. Sorry, we are a bit running out of time. So if there are any questions, I will ask the audience to send you directly an email for offline discussion. So thank you, Alberto, again. And now I would like to ask Ludo Waltman. Here we are. I will assign you, Ludo, as a co-organizer temporarily, just to show your face to the people on YouTube, because otherwise won't be shown, basically. So thank you, Ludo, for being here. I leave the stage to you for your speech.
Thank you, Silvio. It's really great to be in the workshop. Hello, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Just 1 minute to, yes, there it is. Okay, I would like to briefly present to all of you an argument. It's the argument that the progress that we have made in realizing open citations is hugely important, and Alberto already briefly referred to that. But also at the same time, it's an argument that it is completely insufficient, and that therefore we need to move beyond citations. It might perhaps be obvious in some sense, but nevertheless, I feel this is a crucial point. It is not always properly understood, and therefore I would like to kind of make this argument. So this is indeed, and Alberto already referred to it, this is what was recently announced, basically in Crossref, in the Crossref infrastructure, all the references or citations that are available in that infrastructure are now openly available. And that is thanks to the efforts of the team of the Initiative for Open Citations, which, for instance, Silvio and David Schotten are part. So that team, they really did an amazing job because they, together with publishers, with the team of Crossref and many others, they managed to realize this hugely important milestone, and that was recently also celebrated in a short piece in Nature, and that's all great and extremely important, but it is not enough. Let me try to make that argument. So citation data being open and also other types of metadata being open is important for different reasons. For instance, in many cases, the argument is made that this is important to make scientific literature easier to discover, so to make it easier to find relevant literature. And that's a very important argument. An equally important argument, I think, is to improve the way we do research assessment in science. And this is an area where lots of important developments are taking place right now. For instance, what you can see over here is the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. It was founded very recently, and in which an increasingly large number of research organizations make concrete commitments to improve the way they organize research assessment. So this is the result of lots of discussions and initiatives taking place, in particular in Europe, and many organizations are now taking responsibility to improve the way research assessment is done. So there are a number of commitments that these organizations make, and you can see them on this slide, at least some of the commitments, and there's one in particular that I would like to mention, the second one. This is the commitment that these organizations promise that they will primarily base research assessment on qualitative evaluation using peer review, and they will use quantitative indicators in a responsible way to support this qualitative evaluation. So increasingly it is recognized that quantitative indicators or metrics by themselves should not be used to do research assessment, but they can be extremely useful to support human judgments that make evaluative decisions. This is a key promise that more and more organizations are making. More and more organizations are moving in this direction, towards this way of organizing research assessment. The crucial question is, how are we going to do this? How are we going to indeed perform research assessment in a qualitative way? And how are we then going to make use of quantitative indicators or quantitative information to support that qualitative evaluation? That's a complex discussion, but one precondition in my view that needs to be met in order to realize this hugely important commitment, one precondition is that the quantitative indicators, the quantitative information needs to be open. If that information is not open, it's not possible to use that information in a responsible way to support qualitative judgments. So this is one, for me, really key reason why openness of citations is hugely important, but also broader openness of all kinds of metadata. And I will tell you a bit more about that. So together with my colleague here in Leiden, Nation van Eck, I recently posted a preprint in which we look at openness of all kinds of metadata in Crossref. So you see references, so citations, and they are open for many articles. Some articles don't have references, so then they cannot really be open. So that is this major accomplishment of the initiative for open citations. You see that other metadata elements like abstracts and affiliations and funding information, they are increasingly also being made openly available through this Crossref infrastructure. But still, that's the case only for a minority of all the journal articles in Crossref. And that's a problem, because that means there's a lot of articles for which we don't have all this information. We don't know actually which university the authors are affiliated with, or which funder actually funded the research. That information is not openly available. And that means that in research assessments, we cannot make use of this information, at least not from open data sources, only from closed proprietary data sources, and that ultimately will make it extremely difficult to realize all these promises that are now being made to make research assessment more responsible. So why is this data not open? Here you see for abstracts, you see the openness of abstracts and with a breakdown by publisher. So you see on the vertical axis, the number of journal articles published by different publishers. And on the horizontal axis, the percentage of articles with an openly available abstract. So many publishers are indeed doing the right thing, and they are making abstracts openly available. They are at the right of this plot. But there are also publishers, in particular a number of the biggest publishers that are at the left, the top left, and that do not make abstracts openly available. And abstracts, for instance, play a really important role in research evaluations because they are often used to identify the publications around a particular research topics, for instance, around sustainable development goals. So typically what happens is queries are made to search for particular terms in abstracts. But if you want to do it in a proper, transparent, responsible way, then these abstracts need to be open, which often is not the case, as this scatter plot shows you. Affiliation data. So knowing which university or which research organization the authors of an article are affiliated with. Again, many publishers are at the right, they're doing a good job, they're making this data openly available, but there are also many publishers, unfortunately, that are at the left and that don't make this data openly available, which is a missed opportunity. And this is, for instance, the reason why it is extremely difficult to build institutional profiling tools, or even university rankings, for instance, to build these based on open data. So these rankings, which are, as you know, controversial, they can only be made at the moment based on closed data, because that's the only way in which we can know which publications are authored by which institutions, because for many publishers, the data simply is not made openly available. Again, this shows the difficulty of making research assessment more responsible if data is not made open. Same for funding information, we face the same challenge. I won't say more about it. As Silvio already mentioned, there's a video by Bianca Kramer, which goes into a bit more detail. This is a recent editorial in Nature, which I was actually quite pleased with, because it is making exactly this point. It is saying, yes, it's great that citations are open, but that's not enough. We need all the metadata around publications to be open. They make that point in a very clear way, and this is a very clear argument supporting indeed the need for all this metadata to be openly available. Also, the initiative for open citations and the initiative for open abstracts are mentioned, and the important role of these initiatives is indeed acknowledged. There's more. What we also see is that thinking just about publications in the traditional sense of journal articles is increasingly kind of an outdated way of thinking about scholarly communication, perhaps the scholarly record in the terminology of Alberto. So we see all these developments like pre-printing, pre-registration of research, We see developments like open peer review. We see also that articles get updated after they have been published in the journal. There are corrections, there are retractions. We see initiatives like Octopus, which actually make the argument that articles need to be broken down into smaller pieces. So there are all kinds of really important ideas on how we can improve the way we communicate science. The important thing is that what many of these initiatives have in common is that they essentially argue that we need to split up the communication process into smaller pieces. So rather than just focusing on one thing, the journal article, they make the argument that there is the act of publishing your work on a preprint server, which is different from the act of evaluation of your work through peer review, which is different again from, for instance, pre-registering your research. These are all separate things that are each important in their own right, but that probably should be organized in separate ways rather than all being done under the umbrella of traditional scientific journals. In order to make this work, in order to make all these innovative new ideas really successful, we need really high quality metadata that is able to provide links between all the different things that we have, between preprints, journal articles, pre-registrations, peer review reports. All these things need to be linked to each other. Without these links, this is not going to work. And of course, these links need to be made openly available. And gradually, we see indeed that the system is moving in this direction, in particular with the important work that is done by Crossref and the so-called Nexus that Alberto also mentioned. A really interesting and important idea. There are difficult questions. So, for instance, at the left, you see a preprint that was recently posted by Crossref with questions that are challenging about how to organize all of this. It's not easy, but it's crucial that we think carefully about this and that we develop the right solutions to organize all of that. And open metadata beyond open citations, but open metadata in general is a crucial element in this. Going back to Nature, we saw this great editorial that Nature published. They make the argument that all this metadata should be open. I took an article from the same issue of the journal Nature, a random article. So this article about something which seems to be in physics or so. And what is interesting is the metadata. You see when you go to the metadata in Crossref, you see that, for instance, the whole reference list is openly available. Which is great. This shows indeed the commitment that the publisher, Springer Nature, is making to Open Citations. Excellent. You also see the following. When you go to the authors in the metadata, you see the names of the authors and in some cases also ORCID identifiers. That's great. But there's something that is missing, and that's the affiliations of the authors. So you can just see it here in the metadata. There are no affiliations. Springer Nature fails to make affiliation data openly available. Of course, in the full text of the article on the publisher website, there is affiliation data, but in the metadata, they fail to include this hugely important affiliation data. Despite actually the journal Nature itself arguing that this is really important. So the journal Nature is making this argument, the editors of Nature are making this argument, the publisher of Nature is not living up to the standards that actually the Nature editorial itself is promoting, which of course is disappointed and which shows that Springer Nature needs to do a better job. Interestingly, there's also this thing that's called OpenAlex, another data source that provides open data. And there, for the same article, you do find this affiliation data. So this is what I got from OpenAlex, the affiliations of the authors. This is possible because OpenAlex is scraping this from the web. So they essentially built a workaround. If publishers don't provide this data, if they don't make it openly available, then we will just get it from their websites. And that's what OpenAlex is doing. So they are providing a workaround that in some sense solves this problem. The big question, I think, is this really the type of solution that we want? And I have a mixed opinion on this. On the one hand, I think, yes, this is what we need. This solves the problem. At the same time, I think this is not how we should solve these problems. We shouldn't be scraping websites. This is not how we build a proper infrastructure for this type of data. So I think at the moment, what we have is a situation where you see more and more data becoming available, more and more infrastructures, and more openness. That's good. but it's also getting a little bit disorganized, and there are all kinds of different ways in which data is obtained and data from different data sources being mixed. And at some point it becomes really unclear actually what the status of all this data is. Where does it come from? Is it in some sense authoritative or not? Can we really trust that data? So it seems to me that we are in an exciting time with lots of crucial development, but at the same time also we need to think about how we are going to organize this ecosystem of open infrastructures in a really proper way. And that's, I think, a really big question right now. So to conclude, we need all metadata to be open, not just the citations. That's also important because of all the developments in scholarly communication, and with the journal system gradually being turned into a kind of a different way of organizing scholarly publishing. That needs even more open metadata. But we need to be a little bit careful, and the landscape might get quite messy in some sense. So we need to have a discussion about what we really mean by trustworthy, authoritative, open metadata, how to organize this, how to coordinate this. Do we, for instance, consider data that we scrape from a website? Is that really trustworthy? Is that really authoritative? Perhaps not. These are the questions we should ask ourselves, and this is, I think, an important point on the agenda of the open metadata community. And I hope that all the relevant stakeholders will participate in these types of discussions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ludo, for your talk. Very, very interesting, the point that you are raising. There is one question that has been published on the YouTube channel that was about when you started from this precondition of having open data available to be used for building quantitative indicators, then the question was about that. Does this require publishers to unlock the metadata they already have, or the community to assemble it ourselves from publication data? That is kind of related, let's say, to this last point that you have mentioned, but if you have an opinion, strong opinion on that.
Yeah, that's definitely related to this final point. In principle, of course, both could be done. I would argue that the first approach, publishers doing this, would be kind of the right way of organizing this. But you could also think about it in a different way. You could also think about, indeed, the scientific community at some point finding the right mechanisms to organize this, let's say, ourselves without help from publishers, which essentially would mean that we become the publishers. And those organizations that traditionally call themselves publishers essentially no longer provide the services that you would expect a publisher to provide. And perhaps that's our future. I don't know, but it might be.
Thank you. And I have just another comment to add to this, since we are talking about this, since you have explicitly mentioned about the importance of having these links between the publication and all the rest that is out there. Actually, there are a bunch of initiatives that started from research, basically. That is, one has been mentioned also in one of the videos, this idea of having fair digital objects that are actually containers pointing to all these kind of things as a whole work of research. And the other one maybe is that about research objects that have been proposed a few years ago, that have produced even very recently some kind of specification for creating this kind of containers that are actually metadata pointing to links that bring all together all the various output of research. And maybe these two things are reasonable, let's say, initiatives that should be considered in this kind of revision of availability of metadata, let's say, that you have presented here.
Yeah, definitely. I can only agree, Silvio. And there's, of course, many interesting things going on right now around these types of questions. Too many to mention all of them, but the ones that you're now referring to are, in my view, definitely of a lot of interest.
Okay, so thank you, Ludo, for your talk. We have to move to the next one. So I ask Claudio to step in. Here we are. Claudio, I'm assigning you as co-organizer in order to show you in the video on YouTube. Otherwise, it will be a problem. And I leave the stage to you for your talk.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for joining us today, and thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to show you some thoughts about these issues that we've been discussing today. One comment I will make in general, both Alberto and Ludo said a lot of very important things that I believe are quite relevant to how to organize the future. I come to this from a different background from all of you. I'm not an academic. I come from the world of corporate strategy and finance. So I will be a lot more practical in many of my statements. Don't expect from me necessarily theory, expect some very practical considerations. I will make 3 points this afternoon very quickly. One is that fundamentally, I believe scholarly communications are broken and they need to be rethought from the ground up. The second one is what can be done in these circumstances, and then I will quickly touch on implications for citations. Scholarly communications are broken. People may like or dislike this statement, but I will give you my reasons for saying this. There are many complaints the academic community has towards scholarly communications as they are organized today. The 4 that I believe are most relevant are the following. One is that there's a self-reinforcing research and publishing cycle that disfavors historically marginalized communities. And as long as that cycle continues, inequity will continue to characterize science. And this is becoming, as we all know, a threat to the order of society at large. The second one is that there is a set of terms and conditions that hinders the resolution of crises and raises major ethical questions. I will explain in a second what I mean by this. The third one is that the deployment and use of algorithms and data analytics distort academic life rather than enhance it. And finally, that in the effort to improve their performance on some of these algorithms, researchers find themselves in a position where they have to navigate a conflict of interest that they should not be exposed to. So let me go down to quickly pointing out to this point. The first one is fairly straightforward. Research publishing fundamentally has become a race for citations and a race to increase impact factor. This is the view from the publisher's perspective anyway. Whether it matters to all of you doesn't really matter. From their point of view, their job is to increase citations. This means that they will favor publishing research that gathers headlines, that will be cited more easily, that inform how organizations and individuals apply for grants, and what decisions are made about funding research. That leads to ignoring the least interesting aspects of research that are not likely to gather as much communications. Surprise, surprise, that often equates to underserved, underprivileged communities. That is not a good place to be for the academic community at large. Second concern, we cannot be in a position where every time there is a crisis, we have to suspend how the system works. We had to do that with COVID-19 in 2020 when it became necessary to open up archives and back files to allow not just existing and new research, but also significant amounts of foundational research to become available to communities of researchers around the world. Here we are a bit over 2 years later, and we have another crisis. It's monkeypox. Crises are only going to accelerate, most likely, given all the challenges society has. And on a more basic level, there's an ethical issue anyway. Why would licenses be suspended for the victim to help the victims of some diseases, but not others? Or the victims of some epidemics and pandemics, but not the victims of climate change. So it is simply unethical to continue to operate in a world where emergencies are the only way to break through a system of appropriation of knowledge that disadvantages so many people. Third thing, deployment of useful algorithms to start academic life. We know there's a well-known replication crisis. Journals and authors strive to publish eye-catching findings, increase citation. This is driving a wide array of issues and even deviant behavior of all kinds. But as we heard from Ludo and from Alberto, it's clear that there is a rising amount of dissatisfaction, even within the academic community, about excessively simple metrics that fail to capture the complexity and the contributions that scientists and researchers provide. And finally, last but not least, we are commingling publishing and assessing research. If you're an author, you can be forgiven for deciding that you have no downside and possibly some upside for publishing research with companies that also assess your research. That is clearly not a good place to be, and this is a deep unethical situation. So what can be done? I'm not in the business of predictions any longer. After many, many years, decades, when my job was to predict the future, I am done with that. For once, I'm too old, and so it's too easy for me to make predictions now. I may not live long enough anyway to see them realized or not realized, and therefore I should not be in a situation where I cannot be held accountable. But more humbly, I simply look at the history of technology. It took 215 years from Gutenberg's Bible to publish in the first academic journal. If we think we know what scholarly communication should look like in 50 years, we are being extremely unhumble, and that's not a good place to be. We have a construct. We use journals. Journals are based on the scale economies of printing, binding, warehousing, shipping. All this matter in the world of paper. Very little of this applies to digital communications, where the scale economies reside elsewhere. And yet, we still continue to publish journals. Third concern that I have, publishers have managed to confuse the debate. They commingled publishing activities with publishers. Do we need editors? Yes. Do we need proofreading? Yes. Do we need somebody who can look at photographs and images and detect if there is some kind of misbehavior with the images? Yes, absolutely. Does that need to be done by publishers? Not really. And in the same way, we are commingling the purpose of scholarly communications. Ludo provided a long list of things scholarly communications and journals provide today. But journals don't have to do that. There are other sources of actions that can fulfill the purposes of scholarly communications. I'll come back to this in a second. Ludo also showed there is much experimentation ranging from journals with innovative business models to non-journal initiatives. Experimentation should be encouraged, and that means both provide adequate funding and removing barriers to adoptions and changing the incentive system in order to create a level playing field between the legacy assets of journals and the future and the adoption of future initiatives. And finally, there should be some set of principles that should provide some guidance to the academic community as all these initiatives come up in order to choose which ones are most important to support. What you see on this slide are the two co-authors of an article that we are in the process of publishing at the moment. I by no means want to take all the credit, when in fact most of the credit goes to the two of them. I'm just a humble scriber for all the things you will see in the next page. But I think that it's important to point out that, that there has been some thinking about this. We have no intention of arguing that our principles should be set in stone. These are not the 4 commandments. These are a way to start the debate. We will hope that there is more discussion around these issues going forward. What are our 4 proposed principles? The first one is that the models that get supported going forward provide that registration, certification, dissemination, and preservation which are the four key scholarly, four functions of scholarly communications that we have identified, are equitably available to all research contributions deemed to be of sufficient quality. The second one is that the model distinguishes certification from assessment and supports the record of versions construct. You already heard Alberto speak about it. I wholeheartedly agree with Alberto's view about supporting the record of versions. The third principle is that the model should enable research agendas to be driven by global or regional relevance rather than journal visibility and by simply piling up citations and rising impact factors. And finally, the model allows equitable open access to research results for the purpose of reading, mining, and reusing without undermining the sustainability of the publishing enterprise. Publishing enterprise does not mean publishers. What are the implications for citations of these rules? By the way, again, these are principles that we would like to be discussed. We have in no way written the four tables of the law. I will be delighted if we saw them completely changed by a vibrant debate in the academic community on how to think about the future. And I think my two co-authors would feel in the same way. So implications for citations. One is that citations are the heritage of a different time when there were fewer options to measure contributions and the negative effect of counting citations were not fully understood. Now we do understand them. There is no reason to continue to persist in using them. Second, moving from the version of record to a record of versions will create a wealth of knowledge and data that will yield much better understanding on how to assess research and contributions. And so this is extremely valuable way to shift away from citations into something that provides much more nuanced understanding of what individuals and teams have done over time. And finally, there are a number of initiatives, both in the US and in Europe, and Ludo mentioned also the coalition earlier, that are taking active steps to move away from simplistic metrics. This is quite important. Until we change the incentive systems, very little will get done. And perhaps the most important step is to simply start to change the incentives from the academic community itself. I'll stop sharing my slides. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudio, for your talk. Very, very interesting and kind of bold in the proposition since the very beginning of the talk. I am not seeing any question from the chat, but I have one question, honestly, that was about one of the four principles that you have just introduced here. That you
do you want me to bring them back up?
Yeah, or the slides, you mean? Oh, yes, if it is possible, even better. But just to say, so the point is that you say that these principles are not set in stone. It's just, they are just there to start the discussion on the topic. But in the first principle, you explicitly say that all research contribution deemed to be of sufficient quality. So my question here is how you can measure which is the threshold for claiming that there is sufficient quality to a research or not, because I can imagine that this also depends on disciplinary practices, not necessarily they are just generic for all. So I just wanted to stress you a bit on this specific aspect.
Yes, I don't think we are proposing to do away with the peer review, and therefore the issue of understanding whether a system supports a sound peer review process that is of acceptable breadth and quality to gain the support of the academic community will be necessary going forward. I doubt that the academic community will jettison that, and I don't think we are proposing to do so. what we are trying to make sure of is that it's understood that one thing is to provide peer review with all its value, which is to be both a way to understand how the work was done at some level of methodological and intellectual exam and synthesis, as well as provide advice and any incremental ideas that may have to be taken into consideration by the authors. I think all that process contributes rather than detracts from the concept of record of versions. I think that the more open we are about that debate, the more in how peer review provides help, support, or challenge to the authors, the more valuable the understanding of how subsequent versions have evolved and a better understanding of the entire record becomes, and also the contributions of individuals. So I would argue for all sorts of reasons, I will maintain that concept, and I don't really expect anyone to argue that peer review should be eliminated altogether at this stage. The argument is it should, if anything, be incorporated into a deeper understanding of contributions, both for the purpose of understanding how knowledge evolves and to understand how individuals have helped to evolve that knowledge.
Thank you, Claudio. In the meantime, we got another question that is, what could a publisher do concretely today to help move away from impact factor?
I don't know if they can. To be honest, I struggle to believe that they can, in the sense that ultimately the way they define their success is driven by what their shareholders expect of them. And so at least for commercially minded publishers, I like to use this expression because some commercial publishers are good citizens and some non-commercial publishers can be as aggressive in their behavior as commercial publishers. But to the extent that commercial publishers respond to shareholders and shareholders expect certain levels of profits and certain growth rates in profits and cash flows, certain returns on capital, it becomes very, very difficult for the publishers to undermine their operating model, which is based on increasing citations and increasing the importance of their journals within the current system.
Okay, thank you, Claudio, for your answer, and thank you for your talk. So right now, the plan is to have 5 minutes break before starting with the next session. So let's have a coffee all together, and we will see each other here just in 5 minutes. Thank you very much, and see you in a couple of minutes. Hello, welcome back. So just a 5 minutes of break as anticipated, and now it's the time of a presentation by Jennifer and Anna Maria. I ask them to switch on your camera and the mic. Anna Maria is there. Hi, Anna Maria, and hi, Jennifer. I'm just making you co-host for showing your faces in YouTube. Otherwise, that is impossible. I will remove the co-hosting function after your talk. So I leave the stage to you for your talk. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Anna is going to drive. We have a very short time to cover quite a lot of very interesting information, I hope, to the workshop. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk about some early work we've done. As everyone here is probably far more familiar with than most, scholarly research is progressive. So every discovery, set of data, publication builds on previous work. The citation community, bibliometrician community knows this. Well, it's impossible to put every new development in the context of what's gone before. Making comprehensive open citations available can enable that attribution of scientific progress and also enable the evaluation of research and the impacts. But for citations to live up to its promise, we believe as a vehicle for the discovery and dissemination and evaluation of all scholarly knowledge, the scientific frontier really needs to expand beyond the traditional bibliographic metadata into other essential resources, such as data and software. If this makes sense and we extend to these resources, openness is also essential here. So in our talk today, short and quick, Anna Maria and I will describe a new open corpus of data set and software mentions in biomedical papers, which we've created by applying machine learning to full-text biomedical literature. We'll be sharing the process of extraction and transformation of these mentions, as well as hopefully we'll have time to dive into the opportunities and the big challenges that come with this work. Quick intro from me. Anna will introduce herself. I've been thinking about research data from my early days as product manager at PLOS a decade ago, thinking about how to get authors to make underlying data and software to papers disclosed and openly available. As product director at Crossref, I was working on getting these citation types from the journals as a standard part of article metadata when they register it with Crossref. Also at the same time, working closely with DataCite in parallel to get the reverse links, the data and software linking to papers in a standard format so that the superset can be made programmatically available to the research ecosystem. On the Dryad board, I got to understand how tough that is from the point of view of the data repository. Starting Make Data Count with collaborators, I was working on collecting and standardizing metrics for data use, views, downloads, as well as citations. And then as former product director at CZI, I was working on getting these links in biomedicine into a full knowledge graph of biomedical information to help researchers more quickly find information and accelerate discovery. So this problem of data and software citations has been a constant theme in my work for a long time now. Next slide. So we use citations to critique and build on existing research. And this tradition has been applied to forms of published literature, as many of our talks today have been around. At the same time, there have been a number of groups working in the past decade to bring attention to data and software. The benefits of data and software citations for those who aren't very familiar include improved reducibility, particularly when the exact version is indicated, and the credibility of research and clarification about the provenance, use of, and proper credit for these products. So our view is that they should be considered legitimate and citable units, and also that these citations can then be accorded the same importance in the scholarly record as citations of publications. Next slide, please. But the problem of how to establish the norms, protocols, services, and infrastructure required for the entire research ecosystem to realize this has been a significant struggle. that is nowhere near over. If not in its infancy, I'd say it hasn't even progressed beyond preschool stage. This hasn't been for trying, however. We've seen a diverse group of global subject matter experts, publishers, infrastructure and service providers, technologists, university administrators, librarians, funders come together to support and work on it. Here we see 2 Force 11 working groups over years establishing principles to lay out a model for evangelizing and standardizing these citations. The principles are mostly mirrors of each other, roughly covering importance. Why should we do this? Credit and attribution, unique identification, persistence, accessibility, and specificity. Next slide. They laid out a framework for what citations look like, what attributes they need in order to be useful, but how do you actually do it? How do you, as a researcher writing a manuscript, cite data and software that you used and possibly created? So in the publication world, journals have every incentive for you to do so. So they tell you right there on the article. Some data repositories have been doing this for many years. Here you see Dryad. On the software end, as of last year, GitHub rolled out a new similar feature, Citation Files. They conveniently automatically generated citation links that can be referenced. Next slide, please. So what this makes possible is for an author to cite these resources in their reference list when publishing a preprint or a journal article or monograph. Once the publisher has it, they can deposit it with their respective metadata indexer. Except this just isn't working. Next slide, please. A whole host of different reasons. I'm just going to cover some subset of them. Authors, they don't really know how to cite data and software. This is early practice. It's all over the place. It's not really formally taught by any established, groups. So that's at the very beginning. If authors aren't doing it, the whole rest of the pipeline does not work. Publishers who are publishing the literature, they have a tradition for collecting journal article references and depositing them with Crossref, with PubMed, et cetera, to aggregate as citation pairs. But there's no norm for preprint repositories. They're not doing it at all. And when journal publishers do it, they get the reference lists. Many of them strip them out altogether to stripping out objects that are not formal publications, including data and software. What about the reverse direction where the data and software repositories collect links to the associated literature? Let's ask them to do it. But in fact, it's much harder setting up new infrastructure protocols for citations from scratch. Some data repositories ask for this from those scientists depositing the data. Others do not, most do not. Some of them are members of DataCite and can provide that in their metadata. Most do not. Most data sets do not have DOIs. They don't, or they may not have the resources or technical capabilities to do so. Software, even a harder problem since, as we all know, the most popular repository is GitHub. Certainly not built around the needs of scholarly research. They're not aggregating research metadata, linking them to literature and making them available. So if the publisher isn't getting it and passing it on, then those who do, however, are able to pass it to the indexer. Open metadata indexers have set up shop to collect them, but they're wrangling the publishers, trying to find users to prove the value of this data, to convince more publishers to do this. Closed indexers are doing this with the same enclosures that Open Citations was set up to encounter. And open aggregators have discussed implementing a computer extracted approach. If they have all the citations, why can't they do something with them? But in fact, it's a hard problem to extract research data and software. Early tests have typically yielded less than 60% of the record matches when compared to something that's manual, librarian assembled benchmark citation database. And then if all of that, if finally metadata of citations for data and software finally make it to the aggregators, then it can make it to the world. But as we see, this is a long, tedious, and lossy process. So, and the existing model, which may suffice for literature, doesn't work for data and software. This has not, as I mentioned, it's been a noble effort to shoehorn this whole set of research products into this model, but it's not working. So we need a new one leveraging technical capabilities we have today with machine learning. So to this end, CZI has been working on a new corpus of data and software mentions. by applying NLP to the literature. As Anna would describe, this is built on prior art, but CZI has had the fortune of having engineering, data science, and compute resources to build a pipeline at scale. Also with access to papers that are both open and paywall, both journal articles and preprints. And we hope this can help the community begin to test out whether or not a future world of automated data and software citations is possible. It's just a start. We're in various stages of transforming links into citations. We hope that sharing this with all of y'all can bring fruitful discussions on new collaborations, future directions, and identify potential uses of these data sets. So with that, I'll pass it on to the fun part, Anna, on what we got and what happened along the way.
Sure, thank you, Jennifer. First of all, hi, my name is Ana Maria Estrate, and I am a research scientist at CZI, and I've worked with Jennifer at CZI getting started on some of the work that I'll be covering today. And I'm excited to share with you today 2 projects that we started at CZI looking at extracting mentions of data sets as well as software from the literature using machine learning approaches. So before we get started, I want to kind of level set on definitions. And for the purpose of the talk today, when talking about data sets, I'm only referring to data sets identified through an accession number ID associated with a database such as Geo, GenBank, Bioproject. It's not just these 3. But we are referring to accession number IDs. We have done work on looking at data sets, mining data sets identified through DOIs, but I'll not be covering that today. For the purpose of software, we are including things that you would expect. We call this obvious software. We know it's kind of self-referential, but ImageJ, GraphPad, Prism, things like that, as well as algorithms and programs, Bowtie, Blast. We are particularly not including databases, web platforms, or hardware. So before we look into the methodology, some of the summary of the data we've collected by employing our methodologies. So we do have a full text corpus that is comprised of around 16 million papers. These are papers we have through publisher agreements. And we are able to run our algorithms on this corpus of full text papers. We were able to extract around 315,000 papers. So we were able to extract data set mentions from around 315,000 papers for a total of around 900,000 data set mentions, mapping to 400,000 unique data sets and around 700,000 paper data set links. We also ran our software extraction algorithms on this corpus, and here the scale is a little bit bigger, maybe something you'd expect. Around 2.8 million papers had at least one software mention for a total of 48 million total software mentions extracted, mapping to 900,000 unique software mentions. We also ran our algorithms on the PMC open access corpus. This has around 3.8 million full text papers. Around 2.4 million had at least one software mention for around 19 million total software mentions, mapping to 1.112 unique strings of software mentions. So some examples of what we refer to, an example of top extracted data sets from our corpus. These are entries, again, in databases such as Geo, GenBank, and it's interesting to see that, if you look at the second and the third entries here that come on top, these are the complete genome sequencing of the coronavirus isolate. Example of top extracted software, SPSS, are GraphPad, Prism, ImageJ, Excel, SAS, Blast, Stata, and MATLAB are things that come on top. And the number of papers is, the numbers of papers where this mention, in which this mention appeared. Moving on to the methodology of how we actually extracted these mentions from text, starting with data sets. This is essentially a named entity recognition or NER problem, where given a journal article or a preprint, we want to extract mentions of the data set entity type. We are using pre-trained language models. These are models that are pre-trained on large amounts of text. They work really well in capturing natural language complexities from the training corpus. And once we have access to these pre-training models, we can fine-tune them on particular tasks such as the NER task. And that is exactly what we did. Our ML model architecture is basically a fine-tuned model. We've experimented with a number of pre-trained language models. and fine-tuning them on the NER task of identifying dataset mentions. For the training set, we actually used openly available annotations from EuroPMC that we further curated with the help of our biocuration team. So we do have a team of biocurators that we can use for these types of tasks. We ended up with about 60,000 sentences that had around 1,000 mentions of data sets. As mentioned, we experimented with a number of these large pre-trained language models, most of them pre-trained particularly on biomedical and scientific text. So some of you might be familiar with them or heard of them: BioBird, SciBird, PubMedBird, Bluebird, SAPBird, BioLectra, ElectraMed, Biomed Roberta. These are all kind of pre-trained particularly on biomedical or scientific text. And our best model was the SciBird model. It achieved an F1 score of around 94.6% with a precision of 93 and recall of 96. Moving on to the second part, looking at software mentions from the literature, our approach was fairly similar. So we, step one was also applying an NER model to extract plain text software mentions from the literature. However, here we also did additional work in linking and disambiguating these mentions. So maybe you noticed that in the first part, I didn't talk about linking these dataset mentions to a database per se, and that's future work. So for software, as mentioned, we have this NER model. It's also a SciBird model fine-tuned on the soft side dataset. That was built by one of our coworkers. The F1 score of this model is around 92%. We run this model on our corpora, such as the PMC Open Access, as well as our own publisher collection. And if you look on the right, these are the most frequent plain text software mentions that the NER model has extracted from the PMC Open Access corpus. So at this point, these are just strings that the model is extracting from text and is recognizing as pointing to software. So you can see that some of these are pointing to the same, to maybe the same software entity. SPSS and SPSS statistics is likely just SPSS. GraphPad Prism, GraphPad, and Prism are likely mentions of just GraphPad Prism. ImageJ and ImageJ is probably just the ImageJ software entity. So the challenge here is that if we want to assess the impact, the whole impact of a software, we want to be able to count all of these possible variations in which the software either is mentioned in the literature or being extracted by the NER model. So that's the goal of step two, which is what we call disambiguation or really synonym generation. We want to be able to come up with these clusters, these well-defined clusters pointing to software entities. So in the SPSS cluster, we know that all of these string variations that were extracted by the NER model are actually pointing to the SPSS software entity. Same with ImageJ and same with GraphPad Prism or any other type of software, really. I'm not going to go into detail into this slide, but basically to get to those clusters, we built a similarity matrix where we assigned confidence scores between pairs of strings, or that confidence is how likely we think that this pair is pointing to the same software entity. And we fed that into the dbScan clustering algorithm. Once we have these clusters, we assign the cluster name as dimension with the highest frequency on the PMC Open Access corpus. And then we did an exact match search on cluster name in 5 repositories. We looked into PyPy, CRAN, and bioconductor indices, as well as the GitHub and SciCrunch APIs. We did some schema normalization, and that's how we retrieved links as well as additional metadata for these software entities. So some high-level statistics through this approach. I'm looking at the third and fourth row. We were able to disambiguate around 300,000 mentions. That's a little bit less than 30% of the total mentions in our data set, and it's mapping to 6.3 million or 78% paper mention links. We disambiguated them into 97,000 unique software entities. And we're also able to link around 185,000 mentions, or covering 4.5 million paper mention links, or around 55%. In terms of resources, all of our algorithms are open source. We have GitHub repositories, both for data sets as well as software. We also make the extracted data set and paper links available on our GitHub repository. And for software, we've just released the data set last week. It's on Dryad. It's called the Chan Zuckerberg Software Mentions data set. We also have a preprint and a blog post that goes into more detail. That's all I had. I think Jennifer and I are ready for questions. Thank you,
Jennifer and Ana Maria, for this very interesting talk on a very important aspect, I will say, for what concerns citations and mention to something that is not a classic publication. We are kind of running out of time a bit, so I have a question for you, because I'm very interested in software, citation to software, honestly, as a thing that I would like to also study and kind of integrate within Open Citations as well. I was wondering if you have considered also to align the software that you have extracted, and you have done already a lot of the duplication things in order to identify still the same software, even if it is mentioned in a different way within the paper. But I was wondering if you are planning to align that also with persistent identifier for software, such as those one that are made available by Software Heritage, which is this big archive of software, including all the possible version and forks and whatever of a specific software, in order to create a link between basically the mention within papers and these kind of archive that have been done for guaranteeing kind of long-term availability of the software, even when repository like the GitHub or whatever disappear basically in time because of any reason.
Yeah, the problem that you've hit is a big problem and many-sided, right? I absolutely agree that all of these different facets are going to be really critical if we're thinking about the long-term health of how do we treat research software. The work that Ana and I did in merely identifying the mentions in the paper to try was to knit out and flesh out the metadata around the specific research software to, say, a publication. There's further work that we can do, which is to start tuning our models to also identify the version where that is identified. And I think, ultimately we'll need to collaborate and partner with lots of different players, including those software generators, wherever they have stored it, to make sure that there are plans for that software in the event that it's no longer being maintained or the repository no longer exists, preservation, etc. But there's quite a lot of work that we're doing right now, still needed, just to flesh out enough of the metadata around the software that's mentioned to turn it into a citation, whatever style you want, that fits, that can comply or adhere to the software citation principles themselves. Sorry, Ana, I'd let you flesh that out more.
Yeah, just to add to that, so actually we did try to map some of these software mentions to RIDs, so entries in SciCrunch, we tried to do that, and we mapped a number of them. I don't remember the percentage, but I think it was around 14% or something like that. Yeah, sorry, there's something here. There's a car outside. But also we've been talking with Wikidata as well to see if we can map to entries in Wikidata. So that's something we're thinking about.
Okay, thank you, Ana Maria and Jennifer, and we are running definitely out of time. So thank you again for your talk and for being here today. And I have to move to the next speaker, which is Philip. Can I ask Ana Maria, please, to unshare the slides? Thank you. So Philip Meyer. Hi, Philip.
Hi.
Give me just a sec for making you co-organizer in order to being shown in YouTube. Okay, that worked, hopefully. And I leave the stage to you for your talk.
Great, thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfectly fine. Yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Philipp Meyer, and I'm reporting together with Tobias Backes and also the other team colleagues of the Outside project. If I remember correctly, we presented live in Bologna at the first workshop, the reporting about the Excite project. I think 2 years ago, I reported about the preliminaries of the Outside project. So we just started, and this year I can report some preliminary results from the first year of Outside. So this is the setup of the presentation. I will briefly say some words about Outside, the collection, and our pipeline, which we are working on. I will briefly talk about the matching approaches and the results which we currently achieved. It's preliminary, it's not the final results, it's just the first step. And I'm summarizing a couple of lessons learned and give an outlook and show you a bit of the demo which we have released. This is the pointer of the presentation from 2 years ago, where more of the project details are mentioned. Today, I'm just going into the matching part of the non-source items. Yeah, the background of Outside is, so we are developing a tool chain that localizes, extracts, and segments reference strings from full text PDFs, and we are focusing on social science documents, mainly in English and in German. It's important that you also take local languages into account, so that's a specialty of our approach. It's an DFG-funded project at GESIS, the institute where I'm working on, and the University of Stuttgart. It's a full funding for 24 months. Yeah, the starting point of Outside is mainly the remaining non-source items which we left over in the first iteration in Excite. I will quickly repeat the definition, our working definition of non-source item. So this is everything what we extracted as a reference, but could not match to any index which is available to us. So that's very individual. So a different provider of information could have other non-source items. So we are defining this from our perspective, and everything what we are not able to match in our infrastructure is a non-source item in our system. This can also be an incomplete, or faulty reference, and of course also a reference which is just available in a remote index or bibliographic database which we are not reaching. But because we were aware that this is quite a big amount of references which we could not match in the first iteration, we have thought of solutions for resolving this problem of not just being able to match a reference. All the materials, the software, the demonstrators, papers, and everything is stored at the URL which you find below. The basis, as in the first iteration of the project, is SSYR, which is a full text repository of social science documents. It's hosted at the institute here, has roughly 70,000 full texts of a big variety of different document types. Here on the right side, you see some of the most frequent document types, of course, mainly journal articles, working papers, but a big variety of other document types, like also monographs. So we have a big, not a big, but a certain set of full text monographs with hundreds of pages and many references. So this is also included in our approach. Quickly run through the Outside pipeline. It's similar to the Excite pipeline. So we are starting here on the left with uploading PDF files or processing PDF files. We are generating bibliographic records for this. We are doing reference string extraction, paper by paper. We are segmenting and parsing the different reference strings, and in the final or pre-final step, we are matching this to our underlying indices or resources which we have. in the first iteration of Soviport of Excite, we had just our Soviport system, which is a social science collection. We now call them GESI search in the following. So this is the only collection which is pure social science research, papers, articles, data sets, and so on. For the second iteration, so for the outside part here of this project, we added additional big resources which are freely available. First of all, Crossref, which was provided as a dump. In addition, an even, I think, bigger collection, OpenAlex, which was recently released. And DNB is the abbreviation for the German National Library. It's a full index of all the books and also, I think, also thesis and so on. So this is these are the indices which we have in-house as matching material. So big resources, but of course not everything what is published on the web. What we do on top of the Excite project is that we process the extracted references with different tools. So we keep Grobit and Sermine as we had in the beginning of the project. We added AnyStyle, and we used our own tool which we have developed in the first iteration of Excite, XParser. So this is the setup mainly how we work them, we do different combinations of in the pipeline. So sometimes we work on Sermine extractions and work with Grobit or AnyStyle on top of this to parse it, and the other way around. So we have different versions of the extracted references and also the matched references from different tools. So this is a new idea in Outside. What we did on top of this is that we added another resource for matching, and I think this is interesting for the audience here. We added a public web search engine on top of this, because we still realize that this will be not enough. These 4 different collections, we would like to have also the public web as a resource for matching. We have a demo describing the outside pipeline. Silvio mentioned this in the beginning of the workshop, so please go to the video later on if you're more interested. Still, main challenges in Outside are detecting references correctly and trying to match these references. So these are the same problems as we had in the beginning of the project. Here, quick intro how we are doing the matching. So for the internal collections, the red ones are the added ones for Outside. We do a relatively simple Elasticsearch matching procedures, starting with the title and then doing also multi-match queries with different operationalizations. So that's a detail we could discuss later on. I have my colleague Tobias Backes here in the meeting. He could also answer perps. And everything what we are not able to match via these 4 big collections and the different matching approaches, we treat as so-called non-source item for the time being and start querying these references into Bing, Microsoft Bing, the public web API, which is a commercial index, and we have to pay for every query here in the project. So that's not freely available, unfortunately, but we are querying the API with some costs for the project. Here's also some details how we do the matching concretely. Perhaps some matching results. So the graph here is a distribution of the length of the references in different documents. You see the usual unequal distribution with very few documents which have just 1 reference identified, or very few. The majority of the publications has 10 and more references which we could identify with a long tail of very few which have hundreds of references. So in total, we were able to extract 1.79 million references, and the bad news is with the 4 collections, we are still having just 60% non-source items. So a bit more than 60% of references which we were not able to match to any of these resources. For close to 40%, we were able to find some matches in some of the collections. And here's a bit more details about the matching result. So if in a document we can find any match which has also a match in our original database, the social science database, then we have an overlap with Crossref to 42%, to this relatively big, but in terms of content, small collection with the books. To DNB, we have just 6% overlap, and we have a very good overlap with OpenAlex of 66%. So where we find a social science link and also an open link in OpenAlex. For the documents where we could not find any match in our social science collection, we have, and this is the good news, the open collections can give a lot of matches here. We have 60% of the matches are coming from Crossref, a tiny fraction from the DNB, the library, and close to 90% of the matches are coming from OpenAlex. So that's good news in terms of that open collections can really make a difference and make a good resource for matching. But still, the bad number is here that we have still a lot of unmatched references, and we are concentrating with the public web search engine to resolve most of them. Not everything, but most of them. These are a bit more details. I think we are not. It's not necessary for now. In this plot, you see the different article types where we could. So we are just talking about matches here, and we are just talking about matches which we could achieve via the Grobit extracted references. And we see here for the different external collections, OpenAlex, Crossref, and Gesis, which document type has been matched. So as you have seen before, SSY has a lot of journal articles, and of course, the majority of all the 3 indices are also journal articles. So the references which are in the reference list are journal articles, which we could match. Interesting here for OpenAlex is that we have also some other document types which are not so easy to explain. NA is, I think, an unidentified object. I think it could be a website or a data set or whatever. It's a big chunk. I think also preprints are falling into this category, and also here the posted content. So these 2 categories are a big achievement which we just reached, I think, via OpenAlex, and this is great that we have this resource now. So a lot of preprint materials and other content which we previously were not able to match can be matched now with exactly this resource. Crossref, here are the traditional document types, book chapters, and here we also have, with our social science collection, proceedings articles, which is kind of often appearing reference type. I will be quick because we are late in time. We'll summarize a little bit about the lessons learned, which we have achieved in the first year of the project. So mainly the extraction results, if you use different tool chains, and tools differ largely. So this is not absolutely new, but we could really recognize this if we do the extraction with Sermine or with Grobit or with our own extractor, we will have different results. I can show you in the tiny demo in a minute. We will have large overlaps in the match collections, mainly between Crossref and OpenAlex. This is kind of redundant in certain times, but also a new collection like OpenAlex can really make a difference, as I have shown before. So the ability to match to preprints is a very important information, because many people cite preprints in their reference lists these days. We still have a lot of unmatched items. That's a problem, but we will work with Bing intensively, but we have to do it very careful, because every query costs a tiny fraction of a euro, but if it's summing up, if you do millions of queries, so that's an issue. We will learn more in the project. But what we can see, and I will show you in a minute, the decision that we include Bing is making a big difference with many of the social science documents. One key will be the duplicate detection, which we have not tackled or not achieved fully yet. That's very important, especially if you want to do work cost efficiently. Doing querying a duplicate twice and hundreds of times will have a huge consequence on the cost. So we will first resolve the deduplication problem with the references, and then do the querying in the costly indices. It's also true for the in-house indices. Outlook, what I said, we will concentrate on the duplicate detection. We have a lot of ideas here, and we'll work on this. Yeah, we will have to merge the duplicates, which we could identify in so-called canonical representations, where we will derive the queries from in the end. And I have forgotten to say this in the beginning, we will definitely release our matched items back to the Open Citation corpus, as we did in the previous project Excite. So this is the final step of our work. Yeah, I can refer you to the demo, and then I would like to take the opportunity to show a very tiny thing from our demonstrator. So this is a pre-processed document, has a title. This is a very recent preprint of my own. And what you see here, we see different extractions from different tool chains. So here we see the Sermine references, which has been also parsed and segmented and identified via Sermine, the Sermine tool. Here, the interesting thing is that we added the document types for each reference, and then here you see the typical references with the matches in the underlying indices. So this is a Crossref match, and this is an OpenAlex match. As I said, there's a huge overlap, and some documents are very redundant. The matches are redundant, but which is not a problem for the user. Here you see a document which is resolved via Bing. So this is a non-source item which we just could resolve via the public search engine, and this is true also for others. Some are still unresolvable, and what you see here is, so we see the Sermine extraction. If we do the Sermine references treating with Grobit, you see more references. So here we were able to identify 8, and the other tool combination was able to identify 20 references, which is a big difference. So this is also an approach of our project, that we combine the different tool chains and the tools and the tool results and combine them. I think I have one more minute, and this is another paper, a very recent paper submitted a couple of weeks ago, and we refer to very recent literature. And what you can see here, that the amount of Bing the Bing matches is relatively high. This is an old match, but here you see a lot of references which are relatively recent and are only resolvable via the Bing engine here, for example. So this is a 2022 paper, which is available in the archive, was not available in Crossref yet or OpenAlex, but we could resolve it via the Bing API. So what we see already is that Bing is making a big difference. OpenAlex is is making a big difference, and yeah. Thank you for the attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Philip. We don't have a lot of time for questions because we are really running out of time. But I would like to have a comment from you.
Yeah,
actually.
sure.
Since you are using a lot of different tools in your system, from what your perception, what is the best one if used alone?
We are currently evaluating exactly this. We know that some combinations are not working that fine, but what we see is Grobit is a good basis, and Sermon is also working very fine usually. But we see also document types, especially in the hardcore social sciences, where we have also problems with these traditional tools, and our own parser is better. It's very difficult to say, but we will exactly work on this to do a proper evaluation, which combination will be a good one, especially with which document types. And so we are exactly working on this, Silvio.
Okay, thank you, Philip, and thank you again for the talk. We have to move to the next one right now. So I ask Chiara Di Giambattista from Open Citations to, she appeared, and I leave the stage to you, Chiara.
Okay, hi everybody. I'll share my presentation. Okay, I'm Chiara Di Giambattista, the Communication Director and Community Development Manager at Open Citations. And today, with my talk, Where Were We, I will present the recent updates from Open Citations and also the role of the community in Open Citations development. Okay. The history of Open Citations goes back to 2010, and since its origins, Open Citations was designed to change the face of the scientific publishing and scholarly communications, since it aimed to publish open bibliographic citation information in RDF and to make citation links as easy to traverse as web links. In the last 10 years, from little acorns, as David Shotton, our director, wrote in a recent blog post on Open Citations blog, Open Citations has grown to the point that it currently hosts more than 1.26 billion citation links. And today, we can describe Open Citations as a community-guided scholarly infrastructure organization dedicated to open scholarship and the publication of open bibliographic and citation data by the use of semantic web technologies, but also is engaged in advocacy for Open Citations and open bibliographic metadata. We provide data models, bibliographic and citation datasets, a software and online services. In particular, our principal database is COCI, the Open Citation Index of Crossref Open DOI to DOI citations. In August 2021, we crossed the significant threshold of 1 billion citation links in COCI. And as I said previously, we currently host more than 1.36 billion citations. A recent independent comparison by Alberto Martin has shown that the coverage of COCI is now approaching parity with those of the main proprietary citation services. We are very proud of these milestones, and these milestones confirm the essential value of the Initiative for Open Citations, I4C, of which Open Citations is one of the founders. Since 2019, the mission of I4C has been to persuade publishers to provide open citation data by means of the Crossref platform. The I4C Untitled commitment has led the major academic publishers to a progressive change of heart regarding open citations, and as a result, COCI now contains citation data derived from Elsevier, the American Chemical Society, and with our last release also from IEEE. Open Citations is also among the founding organizations of the Initiative for Open Abstract, I4OA. And besides being involved in these initiatives and being actively engaged in them, Open Citations also exposes the following UNESCO principles of open science. We also monitor our compliance with the POSI principles, and we embrace the fair data principles that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and also the I4C principles that citation data should be structured, separable, and open. Open Citations is also part of a wide community and collaborates with many projects that share similar values. In particular, at the end of 2019, we were selected by SCOS for the second funding cycle. And also, since January 2021, we work with the other services involved in the Open Air Nexus portfolio. We also have recently started our collaboration with RISIS, and well, being involved in such a community was fundamental for Open Citation to help us reaching out to potential stakeholders. And also these numerous partnerships also help in positioning Open Citations in the open science ecosystem, and where Open Citations works as an infrastructure with a strong proof of integration and interoperability with the other open science services and projects. Being a community-based infrastructure, these collaborative partnerships are part of the practices through which we assure the engagement of the scholarly community in Open Citations development. Community engagement in Open Citations has three aspects: collaborative partnerships, community crowdfunding to provide financial support for Open Citations, and community participation in the development and governance of Open Citations. Moreover, Open Citations always keeps the scholarly community and its community posted on its developments and news through many channels. In particular, we post on Open Citations blog the main updates. We also update very frequently our social media platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn. And you can also find Open Citations ongoing activities and future plans on Open Citations public roadmap. As you can see from this image, we have still many to-dos, which are the activities we have planned for the near future. And very quickly, these future activities are the creation of a new Open Citation index of NIHOCC, and also we plan to index the citations in DataCite. By the end of this year, we plan to release a new database of bibliographic metadata, Open Citations Meta. This database will remove all the limitations that are now present in COCI. In particular, COCI only indexes DOI-to-DOI citations, and its performance is lowered by having to make on-the-fly API calls to Crossref and ORCID for article metadata. Our developers are currently working on Open Citations Meta development. Well, Open Citations involvement in international networks and collaborations made it necessary to publicly define Open Citations mission, which is now available in the Open Citation mission statement document on Zenodo. The mission of Open Citation is to harvest and publish comprehensive metadata with a scope, provenance, and quality. And in particular, open citation services and data are free, and will always remain so. Open Citations' priority of keeping its services free leads to a knowledge sustainability issue. The present moment, Open Citations relies on the generous support from our community, in particular from our donors and members. And this support made it possible to expand Open Citations team, which now includes our directors, a research manager, and a communication director. And also developers were working on Open Citations development and implementation on a daily basis. However, we still need help from the global scholarly community to keep our services open, but also to improve and maintain our technical infrastructure for many years to come. And how can you help Open Citations? Well, Open Citations exists for the people that use its data for research purposes, and thanks to their support. If you can support Open Citations financially, but you are one of Open Citations users, you can now get an Open Citations access token on our website before using Open Citations REST APIs. It will take you only a few seconds and needs to happen only once. However, it will help Open Citations incredibly by providing objective evidence of the number of researchers and institutions accessing our data. And this evidence can be used to demonstrate the usefulness of Open Citations in the research environment. On the left side, if your institution wishes to support Open Citations financially, you can contribute in two ways. You can apply to one of the 3 levels of membership, or you can ask your institution to fund us through a donation. You can find all the information, or the membership information on our website. I want to end this talk with a quote from Open Citations Director Silvio Peroni, which I think perfectly summarizes the importance and the role of the community in the existence and the development, and also in the success of Open Citations. Open Citations is a plural. Together, we are Open Citations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara, for the introduction. I won't do questions right now because I'm technically involved with the infrastructure as a director. But if any of you have any question on YouTube channel or in the Zoom chat, please feel free to ask. And there is one question on YouTube, actually, that is, thanks for your presentation. One question. Would it be technically feasible, or is it supported to add citations or fix the wrong ones present in Open Citations? So it's a pretty technical question, I would say. So let me answer to this question. So right now, no. There are no mechanisms that have been implemented to do that on the data that we have by external users in particular. So by external, let's say, people that want to update their own bibliographic reference or citation links, for instance. But this is something that we are actually working on 2 different directions. The first one is something that has been already set on our workflow, which is to keep track of how an entity is modified in time by adding provenance information and also change tracking information of the data in order to see the evolution of an entity in time. And that allows us to keep track of how this modification may happen. And the second is that we are currently developing, let's say that the idea is to develop interfaces for enabling external users to modify this data in order to improve them. Trusted users, it won't be like, let's say, pass me the term, a Wikidata approach where all people can modify everything, but here we will select kind of trusted users that will enable us to curate the data that we have to improve them for the benefit of all. Of course, we have already some tools that we have developed, some software for applying these changes on the data. In particular, the OCDM library in Python enabled basically to use programming language Python for expressing modification of these things. But it's still software right now, and we haven't yet exposed any tool for allowing anyone to do this kind of correction. I hope this answered the question. And anyway, there is another question on Zoom. Very quickly, how economically sustainable is Open Citation now, and how far are you from your goals in this respect? I think for sustainability via membership would set an important precedent given the open and non-commercial approach of the project. Thank you. I don't know if Chiara, do you want to answer this briefly, this question, or if and then I can just wrap up it.
Okay, thank you for the question. At the moment we are working on our sustainability, and we have 2 working groups which are made of some members of our advisory board who are working both on the governance aspect and the community building aspect, which are connected with the sustainability topic. I have to say that in the past few years, a lot of help came from being involved in SCOS. Now, by the end of this year, we will also end our formal collaboration in the second cycle of support from SCOS. We will remain in the SCOS family as one of the open science infrastructures, but yeah, we are now thinking about how to create a long-term sustainability plan. I don't know if Silvio wants to add something.
No, you say basically everything is a problem right now. We should not hide it. I mean, being sustainable in the long term is the biggest challenge we have to address in the next years, and we are trying to work on it thanks to the huge support that comes from the community and our advisory board, which is very helpful for addressing these kind of things. Okay, no more question, which is fine. So we can move to the next talk by John Chodaki. There is John. Let me put you co-organizer in order to allow you to appear in the YouTube channel, and I leave the stage to you for your presentation. Okay. Thank you, John.
Can you see my slides?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Okay,
yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and I mean, definitely for the talks throughout the workshop today. My talk's going to be specifically around data citations, and the work that we're doing in a community group called Make Data Count. But I think it really does build on a lot of the presentations as I kind of go through the story arc of where we are and where we're headed as a data metrics community. I think they'll see a lot of parallels about where we are in general as a wider community. Feel free to leave comments in the chat, and also follow Make Data Count on Twitter and visit our website. As many of you may already know, Make Data Count itself is a community initiative. We're not an organization. We're run by people, like-minded people at this workshop, and that are looking towards, and others looking towards a better future and building sustainable source information so that one day we can have reliable, responsible data metrics. What we're really trying to do here is to take a step back and say, you know, the world of metrics in general has been run by people with commercial interests and those that are trying to sell us a lot of snake oil kind of approaches to evaluating research and researchers. When it comes to data, we are already concerned, and we have been for years, that data metrics themselves are something that will take a similar approach. And so we, within the Make Data Count collective, the group, the Change Initiative, We are just people who are interested in making sure that the approach that is taken is responsible, that we as a wider community audit and make sure that the source information that is going to be used or can be used is understandable, normalized, rationalized, and auditable for the creation of responsible data metrics. And so my talk is really about this idea of data metrics, right? So, I mean, right now, you could go on many commercial websites and look up, what are some, metrics for the impact of research data. And I mean, we would say at Make Data Count that these currently there really isn't enough information, reliable information for those to be trusted. And so instead of just being negative about this situation, we've really tried to outline and showcase, what is still needed. What do we as a community need? And we've tried to outline it in terms of a journey, where we are and where we're headed. And for the past several years, we've been trying to move the community through a journey. And as you can see here, we know that there is a lot of steps that are going to need to happen. And it's not just data metrics, it's other types of metrics that really need to have a journey that goes not just from defining best practices, but also about adopting those and contextualizing them. A lot of the talks today were about open metadata, about how to bring better metadata into source information so that we can contextualize not just the connections between things, but also the information around them. And so that we can, eventually and really have reliable ways of enabling evaluation. And then, with that, at least in the data space, that's also around trying to incentivize researchers to share their data. Like, why should they? Really proving to the research community what the power is of sharing your research data. And so just to take a step back, where have we gotten on that journey? Where are we today? Well, there's a long way to go. And we are, as you can see here, still in the very early stages. We can talk about why would a researcher be interested in sharing their research data? Why would they want to kind of bring those connections, and why would they want to cite their data? And there are different ways of talking about the messaging that we want to do, the way we want to incentivize or get researchers interested in this. Many of them are around this idea of quote unquote credit, how to create a way for them to get credit for their data. But the challenges that we see are that this process is very hard. It's hard for researchers to understand, and it's very hard for them to comprehend what are the barriers. So it's not necessarily that data citation or tracking data usage is difficult for us as people who support research, but it is hard for researchers to understand what is the problem? What is it that they are really, what is it that is the barrier for them and for the community? Another big issue that we're facing when we talk about that journey is that data citations, are really something that in many ways we talk about in terms of connections into Crossref. This community, as we were talking about throughout today, is, we're really focused on opening up citations within the Crossref corpus. We're trying to get publishers to open up their citation information. But the reality is that publishers themselves have, in many cases, have not embraced data citations. They have not been able to create consistent approaches and policies that would allow us to have source information to rely on for data citations. And so when we think about why we aren't there yet, like why is it that data citations haven't really taken off? There's a couple kind of observations that we would want to bring up, and many of them are around perceived barriers instead of just actual barriers. So there is a perception that data citations are very complex. So if we sit in publishing conversations or ScholComm's conversations, many times people are saying, oh, it's very hard. We've got to work on the edge cases. We've got to figure out how we could handle citing a data set that has 1,000 authors or is evolving and changing every second. Instead of just talking about, well, actually, data citations are citations, and we should be thinking about them as connections between entities. We're very much focused on the complexity and on the edge cases. And so that creates this perceived barrier of adoption that's like, oh, well, one day we'll figure out all of the edge cases before we get started. Another is really the lack of consistency and guidance. What we've seen over the past several years since Make Data Count got started is that there's this confusion, not just within publishers, but within the wider community of like, how would we create guidance for this when we don't know if we even should be using data availability statements versus a citation list. We don't know what we should be citing or how. And so there's been a lot of confusion that has gone out to authors and to the community. And that has, in many ways, been connected to the wider conversations around I4OC and other initiatives around this idea that, like, how do we connect at a time before when citation lists were often closed, how do we connect data to a paper and have it captured in a closed list? We should elevate it into a new, different space and have it be special. But then as we've moved towards a more open understanding of citations lists, we've now created this kind of segmented guidance that has created a lot of confusion. And so there's just a lot of barriers to how to move forward as a community that's based off of just that kind of lack of coherence along the way. But really, it's also just about tension between resources and priorities. Publishers have more things to do. There's a lot of conversations that are happening. And also, there's this conversation about whether or not DOIs will one day kind of be the place that we can go to for all data discovery. And so why aren't we there yet? Why aren't data citations something that publishers have adopted and researchers understand clearly what the point is and why we don't have a better understanding of connections between data and papers? And in many ways, that is because we're just, as a supporters of research community, we are waiting until there's perfect situation of standards and conversations. We are reinventing the wheel constantly, creating inconsistent approaches and really having a problem with communicating with researchers. And as a result, we just don't have enough data citations that have been put into a reliable corpus that have then been able to be used to incentivize more data citations. And so the critical mass problem is a problem. And while I applaud Open Citations as an organization moving into this into the realm of ingesting citation lists, I think the challenge that we have is not whether or not the additional sources that come into Open Citations will help. It's that as a community, we have a problem where we just don't have enough because we don't have enough. And so as we're moving forward, what are we thinking? As a community, wider community of publishers and data repositories and advocates, what are we looking for? And I think one of the things that we would want to make sure that we really stop doing is allowing complexity and the complexity of any citation problem or any linking between outputs problem. We don't want that complexity to be a barrier. We just need to get started, and we need people to iterate. Of course, we need publishers to just start. We need the guidance that they are giving to be consolidated and simplified. We need to move beyond data availability statements and focus on open citation lists and just have that be prioritized within the publishing community, within the data repository community, and across all communities. And that's a must. But what else is there, right? I think that this is a dynamic that I think has been discussed a lot today, which is how do we move beyond waiting for source information to come from publishers instead of, and actually build source information that is trustworthy that we can all be working on. And this becomes even more important when we're talking about metrics, right? It's like, it's not just citations, it's metrics. How do we create reliable information that can be used so that we can build metrics that can then help evaluate and assess? And that, I think, from a research data perspective, is something that we're really trying to understand, like, how do we get to that critical mass? And so one of the things that we did at Make Data Count was we brought together people who had been involved in Make Data Count for a while. And we sat down and we actually asked this question, what are some pragmatic approaches on how to move things forward? And really the three things that came out of that conversation were, two of them were very much the what we had been moving towards for a while, and we've heard today, which is, we do really need the data citation and normalization of that structure, those structures to be implemented, and the approaches need to be prioritized now by publishers. We need that source information within Crossref and DataCite to increase over time. We also need the complexities and the guidance, the complexities that people are perceiving in this space to be ironed out, to be overcome, and for the community in general to just evolve beyond barriers and think more about implementation. But also we need to think outside the box. And I think there was a lot of presentations today about thinking outside the box and really thinking about how do we move beyond this barrier that we have, this cognitive barrier that we have as a community, that like the only way to get good information is to wait for publishers or for data repositories to update Crossref or DataCite. And that is something that is complex, of course, for provenance and all the issues that we all know, but there's still this information gap that we have when it comes to building a true metric system. That is something that we, as in Make Data Count and in general, really need to be moving forward with. And so the kind of pragmatic parallel track approach that we're moving more towards is one I think that we heard a lot about today, which is that we have to start thinking beyond just having data citations being something that is a change movement within the publishing community, and needs to be more around how do we at Make Data Count in general build a trusted corpus of all the mentions of data that exist in the literature. Not just so that we can have a more comprehensive corpus in a system like Open Citations, but also so that we can start to fuel innovation on the bibliometric side of things. We can start to have information that can be trusted and leveraged in not just Open Citations, but in Scopus, Web of Science, and other sources that we could then allow for people to start to really see the power of data and start to build information off of. And so I think that the data citation corpus itself, like the corpus of all the mentions of data, needs to be expanded out beyond just what we would get in a citations list, and working on projects where we are scraping or we are finding or we are doing text mining that are building a trustworthy, auditable approach is where we have to be moving towards. And so that is where Make Data Count is going to be focusing a lot of its attention moving forward, is on this approach of how do we create a corpus of information that isn't just from waiting from publishers and data repositories, but also is coming from unique machine learning approaches on the issue. And so that's kind of the state of where we're at and where we're headed within Make Data Count. And I appreciate the time. And if you have additional comments, of course, please visit us on makedatacount.org. And again, we are a community effort. We would love more involvement. So anybody who's interested, please join us.
Thank you, John, for your very interesting talk. I'm not seeing any question unless, well, there is actually a suggestion in the YouTube chat saying, please talk to us, done by Philip. I think it is, a starting point for a discussion there. But I have a very quick question for you, honestly, in terms of citations to data and data sets. Of course, we have seen that there have been some community effort in the past, like in Force 11, that tried to propose some principles for doing proper citations to data to be included in the reference list. But according to my experience, my personal experience as a researcher, even people that are aware of this principle are not really using them. And so they do not put the reference in the reference list about data, even if they are actually using some data. And usually, if we are lucky, we have just a link somewhere in the paper referring to them. Do you think that these, I'm a bit provocative here, but these kind of principles that have been made available and produced by the community are effective to push for this availability of data citations, or they have still a limited, let's say, consideration within the community?
I definitely think that they are, they're useful. I do think that like the joint declaration from Force 11 was something that we should have much more had. We had implementation processes and projects around, but we should have done a much better job shaming people on not moving through and actually implementing them. But that being said, I mean, there's really two sides to this I was trying to get to in the talk, which is like, there's the side of it that like researchers themselves just kind of saying, well, I mean, I cite my data, or I mentioned my data. I mean, I'm not hiding it. And the publishers then doing some weird stuff where they either pull it out or they say they got to have other reasons. And I think that a big challenge that we have is that the declaration that we did, now like maybe 10 years ago, was something that was a little ahead of its time, in the sense that citation lists themselves were something people were still wondering, can they be open? Many people were advocating like they're just facts, they should be they are open, but the question was still kind of out there. And so something like the joint declarations, those principles, it kind of flew into an ecosystem that was still kind of saying, well, citations are closed, but you want to share the connection between a paper and a data. So we've got to find these workarounds. And so there was a little bit of a paralysis amongst even the best advocates for those principles. That was, how do we implement this? And when the systems and the tools within publishing did not support data citation the way we wanted, we were a little bit okay with that, because we were worried that like, well, why would we put data mentions in a citation list that is closed when we're trying to make connections between papers and data open? And so we created a kind of a weird system of data availability statements that now people still advocate for, even though it's just like this kind of strange workaround. And we are stuck in this kind of this logjam. And now we're at a situation where we kind of, as a community, are moving towards just the assumption, as we should have from the beginning, that open citations lists are just the norm. And we now are stuck back at the very beginning of saying, well, can we follow those data citation principles? And I think like, it seems like, for some of us that are inside all of this, that should have been something we should have figured out 10 years ago. But I actually think the timing is now for that to happen, for us to clarify a lot of the messaging, and for researchers finally to really understand, like, the guidance that we've been giving them, and for publishers to implement what they said they would all along. I guess my other point that I was making in the talk also is just that, but even that will take time. And when it comes to something like data metrics, we don't have time to wait around for publishers to figure it all out, for us to then start to build some evaluation metrics for research data. So we have to find other ways of creating trustworthy source information. So I think it's one of these things where we do need to start parallel tracking. And we as a community need to stop saying like the only way to get to this information is through waiting for publishers to do it the right way. And like you said, the information is there, it's being mentioned in full text. So like we should find ways for us to get to it so we can really help the data metrics roll out as well.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, for answering my curiosity and my questions. So that's basically the last talk. Now I will leave the closing to David Shatton from Open Citation in order to close this very interesting workshop and to wrap up basically what we have seen today. So thank you, David. The floor is yours.
Okay. Can you all hear me and see me?
Yes.
Good. We are past the time for the end of the workshop, so I need a ruling from Silvio about whether or not to proceed. And for
yeah, proceed with the slides without any problem.
Very good. Okay. So the first thing is to thank all the speakers. I think I'm amazed how fast this afternoon has flown by and how many challenging and interesting thoughts I have been given. So I want to share my screen with you and make a few concluding remarks. And these will be focused primarily on tipping points. I think, all know what a tipping point is. The question is, are we there yet? I think in terms of open science policy, we have made good progress. A number of national and international statements have come out accepting the principles of open science as aspirational policy goals, and I've listed 3 of them there. One from UNESCO, one from the EU, fronted by France, and one from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, all pushing to make the results of research available to the public. And such open access mandates are being adopted by universities and funders progressively. In terms of practice, there has been some good progress, although I don't think we're there yet. Publications are increasingly open access. Estimates vary, but certainly at least 30% of scholarly articles are now fully open access. And the Directory of Open Access Journals lists over 18,000 fully open access peer-reviewed journals. In terms of research data, we've heard from John just now how difficult progress is. I think it's worth saying that this is very variable between to do with structures and molecular sequences. There has always been a philosophy of sharing this data openly, and many of the bioinformatics databases are open and have been for 40 years. And in terms of metadata, which has been the focus of our discussion today, there's a long way to go, although in his article in Quantitative Science Studies last year, Ian Hutchins described the openness of bibliographic citations as being at a tipping point. In terms of the sustainability of open science infrastructures, I think the progress has been much more limited. One of the POSSE principles is that infrastructures that enable open science should be sustainable. And it's here, I think, as Silvio just mentioned, there is a need for much further progress. We're very far from reaching a tipping point, although progress has been considerably helped by SCOSS and by Invest in Open Infrastructures. I want to draw an analogy. Here you see a picture of a little-known musician busking. His music is made freely available, and a few kind people throw a few coins down for him. And from time to time, he can earn a little more money by being commissioned to entertain at private events, such as children's parties. But he longs for his talent to be recognized and for his work to be properly supported. How like Open Citations is that? We give our citation data available and make it available freely to all, and a few institutions recognize the value of this and generously support us financially, and we're very grateful to that. And in addition, we participate in some international research projects for which we receive small grants. But wouldn't we and other open science knowledge infrastructures aspire to be like the Florentine Renaissance artist Michelangelo, who received patronage from the Medici family, or like Jean Sibelius, who at a really quite young age was given institutional patronage by the government of Finland, at first for 10 years and then for life, to permit him to continue his work as a composer. In at Open Citations, this process has started, and I'm very happy to acknowledge the enormous contribution of the French government through its Open Science Plan that has contributed significantly to support our activities, and without which we could not have hired half the people that we now have on staff taking this work forward. With similar support from other national and international institutions, Open Citations and other open knowledge infrastructures would be able to transition from being what the POSI principles call sustainable infrastructure to becoming actually financially sustained and provide services upon which the global scholarly communicator could rely for many years to come. So that's our direction. But we need, as Chara was saying, we need the community to come with us. But in particular, I think we must look to not just individual libraries and scholarly institutions to support such open infrastructures, but governmental support and intergovernmental support. We can't expect such support just because we say nice things. We have to earn the support. And what is Open Citations planning that will enable us to deserve such support? First, later this year, we're launching Open Citations Meta to serve bibliographic metadata to back up our existing citation metadata. We need to maintain our data quality, our rich semantics, and the full provenance information on our data that mark us out. And we need to be able to curate, archive, and preserve all this stuff over the long term. In addition, we need to widen our holdings into the humanities and sciences, include language and Latin script metadata, and do other things that promote equity and inclusiveness, which has been referred to earlier today. We need to include metadata from publications lacking DOIs, and Philippe has just told us how difficult that is, but it's an aspirational goal because most of the scholarly citations are in publications lacking DOIs or in publications where the publishers fail to submit their references to Crossref. And we need to broaden our scope to include patent references, software references, as John was talking about, and research data references. As John was just talking about the research data, software we've already heard about. So all of this should be done to enable support of transparent and reproducible research assessment and to ensure open digital sovereignty over this scholarly metadata. So this is our roadmap. This is where we're going. And one of the problems is that in order to achieve it, we need additional support, but we need to achieve it to win that additional support. So I leave that conundrum to you, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, David, for the closing speech. And the workshop is definitely over right now. So I would like to thank all the audience who participated here in Zoom and that followed us on YouTube. The recording of this workshop will be made available on YouTube, of course, in order to watch it again or to share it with other interested partners that could not be here today for any reason or another. And I would like to close it by thanking all the organization here, and with the hope that next year workshop will be, of course, streamed, but hopefully in presence here in Bologna as the very first edition that we did a few years ago, right now, 4 years ago. So thank you all again, and have a nice evening and afternoon or morning, depending on from where you are following us. So thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.